Hi, it's Dwyer. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. It's October 10th, 2025. Please pay close attention to the date. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, let me point out the obvious. Yesterday, Thursday night game, nationally televised game, defending Super Bowl champion, and they were going up against a rookie quarterback. It's even worse than that. The rookie quarterback didn't even start at the beginning of the year. This is a guy who's just starting now. So you have things called survivor pools. Everyone shows up in late August, early September. They're ready to compete. They feel they have a shot. They know in their hearts they're going to make it at least to November. Folks, I'm guessing for most of these survivor pools, 85 to 90% of the people have already been knocked out. Right? The same way the Giants knocked out the Eagles. That's the same way many people, many self-anointed geniuses thought, hey, I know the game. I'll overlook the fact that these are divisional foes. You got one team that's winning. You got one team that's losing. High-profile game. Philly will obviously make it through. Well, folks, if you're really going to try to make money, you're going to have to pick some outliers. And you're going to have to get there before the rest of the public. You know, if you're not sounding crazy, then you're not trying when it comes to betting. Let me also point out, too, earlier this week, I made a video where I made my weekly picks. Subscribers know I make weekly picks. In my eyes, that's for entertainment purposes. Just do the math. If I'm getting even money, and you and I know I'm not, right? You and I know that the casinos get rich off the VIG. In other words, even if I'm picking close games, often I'm getting a minus 110. Right? That's by design. That's the way the system's set up. But let's pretend I was getting even money, a plus 100. Right? For me to beat out a 20 to 1, a 20 to 1 bet on a future that hits, right? For me to beat out that bet, I would have to win 20 weekly bets in a row, right? I'd have to bet on 20 games and go 20-0 for me to get to the 20 to 1 odds on one futures play that hits. And you and I know there are bets out there far greater than 20 to 1. Right? When I say 20 to 1, I'm, disregarding the shortest odds. And think about some of the teams you got very short odds on this year. The 1 seed in the AFC from last year, the Chiefs, that are now below 500. Right? The Eagles, who lost to the Giants, who weren't unbeaten going into that game. Right, I'm just telling you that to match futures, and of course futures are hedgeable. In other words, I have 20 to 1 on some team. They make the playoffs. That first game they play, I say, you know what, let me load up on their opponent just in case this doesn't hit. Right? I need for folks to think about the math involved. 1 unit at 20 to 1 was on one side of the play, even if I spent 5 units on the other side of the play. And let's say the 5 unit side hit. And again, for simplicity's sake, we're assuming everything's even money. I would still make 5 times my income, right? I lose the $1 on the 20 to 1. But then I'm collecting 5 on the other side of the play. So I get the fact that People who criticize sports books talk about how the house retains a bigger than normal share of the amounts bet on futures. That's because most futures bettors are just betting for their favorite team. It's just to enhance their fandom. They're not betting strategically. What I want to do here, now that we are 6 weeks into the season, now that we can see some things, now that some unheralded offenses and defenses have actually quietly established themselves, what I want to do is to focus on a division, the AFC South. Right? Understand, the Jags, who only have one loss, are playing Seattle. They're playing host to Seattle. Right? It's the Jags' second week in a row at home after beating, of course, in their first home game, the Kansas City Chiefs. So now they're home. They've slept in their beds. You notice you're not relying on Trevor Lawrence. Right? He's an athlete. He has a high top end, but he also has a very low bottom end. He's a volatile quarterback. Right? We're actually looking at the Jags and we're relying on the defense. Well, understand, if the Jags win, even skeptics are going to say at 5-1, I need to pay attention to this team. Right? Even skeptics are going to figure out that whatever they thought a few weeks ago, the Jags have the defense and have the start to be well positioned for the playoffs. Well, what I want to do is to look at a team from that division that made the playoffs last year. They're below 500 right now. They made the playoffs last year. They beat the Los Angeles Chargers in the playoffs last year. Now we're looking at Houston. Folks, I need for people to think about this start to the year. Right? It's a start that got them 0-3. They started the year on the road against a team that I'm becoming convinced is either the best team in the league or the second best. And that's the Los Angeles Rams. Right? They played the Rams in LA. They lost the game 14-9. They gave up a whopping 14 points to the Rams in LA on September 7th. Now the second game was against a team that's won a lot of games in the closing seconds. Right? Another team with a winning record. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. When you think Tampa Bay, you think offensive juggernaut. Now they played Tampa in Houston. They lost the game. How many points did the offensively blessed Buccaneers score? 20. How many did Houston score? 19. So then we get to week number 3. Houston's 0-2. Houston on the road against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now let's do the math, folks. You tell me which of those 3 teams is below 500 or is 500. Again, it's the Rams, Buccaneers, Jaguars. Understand how unkind the schedulers were. Rams in LA, Jags in Jacksonville. They lost to the Jaguars 17-10. 3 games against 3 teams with above 500 records. And the most points, that this Houston Texans defense gave up were 20 points to Baker Mayfield and Tampa Bay. Week 4, they're 0-3. Week 4, they play Tennessee at home. Tennessee rebuilding. Their quarterback's a rookie, first pick in the draft, Cam Ward. But understand, Houston scores 26 points in that game. The Titans get shut out. They score no points. So now we're at a point where we're 4 games into the season. And the most points this Houston Texan defense gave up in any game against 3 excellent teams and Tennessee was 20 to Tampa. So then we get to week 5. They're on the road. They played the banged up Baltimore Ravens. But understand, folks, even banged up, the Ravens have Derrick Henry. You would have thought the Ravens at home, after a slow start, needed the game. How many points does this Houston defense give up? And I'm talking about a team that's below 500 right now. They're under the radar of a lot of people. Right? Houston gave up 10 points to Baltimore. Houston's offense clicked. That's what happens weeks into the season. Those offensive units that have started a little bit slow, they start to get it in gear. Houston scores 44 on Baltimore's defense on the road at Baltimore. So now Houston has a bye week. Why is all of this important? It's because if Jacksonville loses to Seattle, right, Houston will be in the mix if they could win their next few games. Now they have a bye week. Let's think of this situationally. Coming off the bye week, the week after this one, they play Seattle in Seattle. Folks, I would say it's a great spot. Let's say Seattle beats currently 1-loss Jacksonville in Jacksonville. That's going to be an emotionally draining win, isn't it? Then Seattle has to travel back across the country to play a team that hasn't given up more than 20 points in 5 games. Then, of course, Houston starts a home stretch of 3 games. Now, the opponents sound difficult, but this is Houston at home. Week 8, they play the 49ers. Week 9, this defense, one of the best in the league, let's say it out loud, plays a second-year quarterback in Bo Nix. Let's just say, when you hear the words Houston Texans, you need to be thinking about unders. Houston against Denver looks like an under to me. Then, of course, their 3rd straight game at home. They play the Jacksonville Jaguars. After that, they go on the road to play Tennessee. So let's just say Houston, who right now are 2-3, if they can do well in a homestand against injured San Francisco, second-year quarterback Bo Nix and Denver, and nemesis Jacksonville, then we're in the home stretch before they play the Titans, right? If they can beat Seattle coming off a bye, if they're 3-1 over their next 4 games, right? 3-1, this team that made the playoffs last year, this team that has C.J. Stroud as their quarterback, this team that should be getting their running back, Joe Mixon, back. It's possible that this Houston team, which is overlooked, which has one of the best defensive units in the league, could be 2 games over 500. Right, folks? When we're talking about a team like Houston and you spot the defense, right? No one's talking about it. You're hearing about the same list of teams. You're hearing about the Rams. You were hearing about the Eagles. You're hearing about some legacy teams, right? We're hearing KC is, making a revival. This could be Buffalo's year and stuff like that. Um, just recognize that on futures, you're getting better than 20 to 1 on this team. Just recognize you're getting one of the best defenses in the league on a team that just scored 44 against the Baltimore Ravens. Give it a look. Let me say this too. Later in the year, they do play the Bills. That's a home game. Then they go to the Colts. Daniel Jones has set the world on fire. How long's that going to last? How long is it going to take defensive coordinators to match Jones to his head coach and figure out the tendencies? Then, of course, they play Kansas City week 14. I'll just say this, and I know everyone looking at EPA is, saying, oh, KC's on the way back and stuff like that. Folks, they're below 500 as I make this video. Right? They don't have much of a rushing game. That's as I make this video. Right? I would argue that Pat Mahomes just doesn't have as much to work with as he once did. Can we agree that Travis Kelce looks like a guy who is thinking about his future wedding, who clearly has lost a step? Right? Put differently, Travis Kelce is no longer Travis Kelce. By the time week 14 rolls around, will the Kansas City Chiefs still be the Kansas City Chiefs? Folks, that's an open question. Let me say, too, the last game of the season that Houston plays is against Indy. Right? If Indy makes the playoffs, if Indy doesn't have anything to play for, I know on paper this game looks like a mountain. It might be a non-event. And of course, that Colt game at the end of the season, Houston would play that in Houston. Let's talk about Cam Newton. He is one of the best analysts in media. Right? This is a former MVP. This is a guy who made it to a Super Bowl. He was talking one time about Jalen Hurts. And he said in his mind Jalen Hurts wasn't top 10. And that got some blowback with some colleagues. Right? Now let me say this about Jalen Hurts. It needs to be said. He hardly ever turns over the ball. The tush push is one of the best plays in football, and you understand very few quarterbacks could pull that off. Jalen Hurts is one of them. He's the premier guy. Right? He also has a persona that translates with teammates. In other words, Saquon Barkley shows up. Saquon Barkley is a gym warrior, lifts weights and stuff like that. Guess who else is a gym warrior? Jalen Hurts. In other words, people might get frustrated with Jalen Hurts. Wide receivers might get frustrated with Jalen Hurts. But no one questions his commitment. Right? Philly is a tough town. Right? Steve Carlton one time didn't get the vote of a Philly writer. Right? Rest of the world loved him. Some local writer, I believe it was Bill Conlon, didn't like a guy who was clearly one of the best in the game at the time. Right? Philly's a tough place. But even tough Eagle fans sense that Jalen Hurts is committed to the sport. But let me say this. While Jalen Hurts has leadership skills, while while the fans don't question his commitment, understand that that can't last long with high-level offensive players. Right? I couldn't imagine a Davante Adams who followed Aaron Rodgers. Right? Adams was a Packer, right? He followed Aaron Rodgers. He was a Jet for part of last year. Right? You have a whole group of players like Davante Adams who think to themselves, look, I'm a receiver. I like to go deep. Very few corners can stick me man to man. I need a quarterback who can throw the ball accurately to me deep. Right? I don't want a running quarterback. I don't want a quarterback who doesn't trust deep receivers. Right? So you have a situation right now in Philly where A.J. Brown knows his numbers would jump if he were following the Davante Adams blueprint and playing with quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers and now, in the case of Davante Adams, Matthew Stafford. Understand the situation with the Rams. Puka Nakua's still getting his balls. Look at how many catches he has. It's not like Davante Adams is somehow preventing Stafford from throwing to Puka Nakua. But yet, Adams is getting his touches. Right? Adams is up over 80, 90 yards. Right? I believe that while Hurts is a winner, you have to play a certain type of football. Right? If Hurts were throwing to, name the great wideout, Jerry. Right? With wideouts, you don't even have to say last names. Jerry, Randy, Terrell, right? Even those guys, the best, right? Michael, are going to say, hey, player, you're not getting me the football. Right? Word's going to get around the league. And even though the Philly GM is one of the absolute best, right? You got studs all over the field at Philly. You're going to have some wide receivers who are going to think to themselves, look, I need the ball. And this guy can't get it to me. So Philly had a year where they collapsed, and it was recent. Right? I'm not completely convinced, given the few touches that Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown are getting. I'm not convinced that this Philly team is going to make it to the finish line, even though I have that defense in a fantasy pool. Let's continue talking. Folks, you know something's up. I believe the press got distracted on this story. Draft day, we kept hearing about Shedeur Sanders. Right then, Cleveland took Shedeur. And people said, hey, they picked a quarterback before Shedeur. Could you imagine that? Right? They picked a quarterback who was shorter than Shedeur. We'll overlook the fact that Dylan Gabriel is as tall as Kyler Murray. Right? He's within the same height range as Baker Mayfield. Right? Baker's team has one loss. Baker's throwing the ball all over the field. Well, you know something's up. You know something's up when the team decides to have Dylan Gabriel start his career as a starting quarterback in the National Football League in Europe against the Vikings. Weren't the Vikings in the playoffs last year? Then, of course, they follow it up. Mike Tomlin is a defensive-minded coach. He's from the defensive side of the football. Right? You look up some of the rankings on defense, and you're going to see there's some outfits that have the defense of the Steelers very highly rated in terms of tackling. You know, guys like T.J. Watt are going to introduce themselves, or at least try their damnedest to, to the quarterback. That's Dillon Gabriel's second game as a starter. So if you look up Gabriel's numbers, folks, UCF, that's a big-time program. That's a big-time offense. Gabriel was the starter at UCF early in his college career. Then he goes to Oklahoma. I just named two guys who are roughly his size. Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray. Right? You could imagine how hard it would be for a transfer to get accepted at Oklahoma. Right, folks? Dillon Gabriel was able to transfer to Oklahoma, and he put up spectacular numbers to the point where, you know, Bo Nix's alma mater, one of them, we know Nix was at Auburn. Nix transferred to Oregon. Right? Folks, believe it or not, Gabriel leaves Oklahoma and travels to Oregon. Right? Phil Knight's school. Great facilities. And of course, in his 1 year at Oregon, Dillon Gabriel was the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. 30 touchdowns. 6 picks. Let me repeat that. 30 touchdowns, 6 picks. He finishes college with a 65.1% completion rate. This is a guy who scouts know is excellent. At least he was in college. I'll agree. Pass defenses are a bit better in the NFL than college. Right? But in college, 65.1% completion ratio for his career. So now he's a starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, and he's playing the Steelers his second game. Understand, Cleveland is so comfortable with him that they traded Joe Flacco inside the division. Right, folks? Cleveland already has one of the league's top-notch defenses. If they can just get a quarterback who doesn't turn over the football, again, 30 touchdowns, 6 picks, Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, the 1 year he's at Oregon. Right? And, again, he's attending schools that Baker, Kyler, and Bo attended. Right? You know the way it is in high school football. You have tons of guys in every state trying to play for the Oregon Ducks, the Oklahoma Sooners. This guy played for both and UCF. Right? I think folks need to keep a hard look on the Cleveland Browns. This is really more of a week-to-week play. No, I don't expect Cleveland to make it to the Super Bowl this year. But what I am expecting are some unders. I'm also expecting Cleveland to surprise some teams. You got a healthy line in the Steeler game, for example. Right? The Shedeur Sanders talk has completely overshadowed the fact that Gabriel was the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. That Gabriel isn't a game manager. This is a guy throwing the ball all around the field. Now, Greg Cosell, quarterback guru, right, was on a show, and Cosell talked about how impressed he was with Dillon Gabriel. He did say that Gabriel, wasn't going to drive the ball downfield like some of the stronger-armed quarterbacks in this league. I'm just telling you, I lived through the Joe Montana era, right? Montana didn't have a Browning Nagel gun. Many of you are saying, who the hell was Browning Nagel? That's the point I'm making. Right? You have all these guys with rifles who can't play quarterback. Maybe this guy can. Right? He's also in a cold weather division. Right? This isn't, the NFC West where, Matthew Stafford knows he'll have an opportunity to throw the ball all over the field in December. Right? This is the cold AFC North. Right? Maybe Gabriel's, offensive dominance, that isn't necessarily a Russell Wilson type of approach where a lot's deep. Maybe that will bring Cleveland back into the mix. I'm sure if you're a Browns fan, you realize every day you look at Baker Mayfield that the Browns made a big mistake letting a legitimate quarterback leave town. Right? Baker Mayfield was that rare quarterback who could throw for a lot of yards, who was fan friendly. You remember when he was a Brown, he was making commercials then. Right? And he was a guy with a certain level of moxie that could, have teammates say, yeah, we're going to win this game. He was inspirational in his own way, just like you saw Jackson Dart with the Giants yesterday, bring a certain energy. And Cleveland let him go. Right? Cleveland now has Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. Right? Young guys. I think Gabriel might be a keeper. You don't start a guy against the Viking D and then the Steelers D his first 2 games in the league unless you're pretty certain that the guy can acquit himself. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me also say too, while I do, release week-to-week bets, I'm a fan of football like everyone else. As I've said here many times, I believe you want to be strategic on futures. The opportunities are stunning. I think Jacksonville is underrated right now. I think Houston's underrated right now. Right? You walk in ready to bet futures on Houston. How many other people in line at the casino are going to be trying to make that bet? Right? That might be the kind of thing where you need to show up with the line number. Right? Because if you go to the counter and you say, hey, I'd like a futures on the Texans to win the Super Bowl, the guy behind the counter is going to look at you. Then you're going to have to say, bet 7372. Right? I'm guessing the guys in line saying, hey, give me the Lions to win the Super Bowl, don't have to also give information to the person taking the bet. So think it through. If you hit, these two teams are related, right? If you hit on either of them, you're in the catbird seat, right? Let me just say, look hard at the Texans. They not only made the playoffs last year, didn't they make the playoffs the year before last year? Food for thought. Those are my thoughts. I look forward to yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.